All right, this episode is special because it is a behind-the-scenes look into the nitty-gritty of Tara Dower's team, which was called Chump Change FKT on the Appalachian Trail earlier this month and through August. This is the crew conversation. I'm really stoked that we're doing it. We have her crew chief here, Rascal, to just comment on, I guess aftermath is not the right word, but just like everything that has happened since, what happened during, etc. And I mean, the demand for a conversation with Tara was high, but we put out this request on social for like any questions, comments, etc. that you want Rascal and the team to answer. And I actually miscounted. So I think I said previously 260. We got 317 responses, and they fit into kind of a fair number of common categories, but a lot of demand for this conversation. Rascal, it's great to have you here. Give the audience just a quick intro on who you are and what it means to be a crew chief for these types of efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Rascal, and I've been friends with Tara Dower since 2019. We met when we were both through hiking the Appalachian Trail for the first time. And we've just kind of been really close friends ever since. And she'll call me when these crazy endeavors kind of enter her head. And we've done a couple other hikes together. I myself am a triple crowner, so I'm very adept with the thru hiking community. I'm also a runner, not to the same level, but I also run as well. And so it kind of just fits that she wanted me to be on the team, on the crew. I had helped her with her first FKT ever on the Mountains to Sea Trail back in 2020, which was successful. And so I think having that foundation was the main reason that she knew that I would be a good choice to kind of be the chief of the crew, even though it was a lot more than either of us had ever imagined. But it clearly worked out. So here I am.
Now that the dust has settled, do you have an opinion on which experience was more challenging, the Mountains to Sea or this AT?
Man, it's hard to say. On the Mountains to Sea Trail, because we were so inexperienced, I mean, I think she might have had maybe a harder time. I don't know. The length was also different. You know, it was a much shorter trail. But we didn't know anything about nutrition back then. We didn't understand like the different like terrain of the trail and how we should plan miles based off of that. There was only myself, one other crew member, and then her mom came in at the end. So it was a much smaller crew as well. But I mean, overall, the Appalachian was obviously much, much harder. Even though we knew what we were getting into, much, much, much more prepared. And at this point, you know, Tara's, you know, a couple more years into her running career and has a lot more experience, and a lot more training under her belt. So that gave us the edge this time.
Do you remember the initial conversation when Tara put this on your radar, and then also what ultimately the selling point was for you to commit to this? Because this is a 6-week plus endeavor. It's quite a life commitment. So curious to get the behind the scenes on that.
Yeah, I mean, she's been loosely throwing around the idea for almost 2 years, and then about over a year ago, I specifically remember at Trail Days in Damascus in 2023, she was like, I'm gonna run it, like I'm gonna do it, and I'd really like you to be my crew chief and all this. And I was like, I don't know, Tara, I'm busy. Like, my plans for that summer were to hike a smaller trail, and then my plans for this summer were to finish off my Triple Crown. But the trail just decided that I was supposed to do the CDT last summer, which made me free for this summer. And it was just the promise of like an adventure is always very intriguing to me. I mean, there's nothing I'd rather be doing in my life than spending time on trails with the most amazing community that I've ever found, the trail community. So it wasn't that hard to rope me into it, honestly.
I love that sentiment for the adventure component. And just based on what you've described, does hiking remain a pretty significant aspect of your life? Like moving forward into next year, future years, are you the type of person that is always going to want to prioritize being on some sort of long trail, like in the summertime, or if you're heading over to a place like New Zealand, doing like the Te Aurora in our winter? To talk about sort of like how your lifestyle fits into this.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely center my whole life since hiking the AT. So for the past almost 6 years, that's all I've kind of focused on is what my next adventure is, specifically in the running and hiking realm. It brings me the most joy to experience miles with really cool people. And so I am actually planning on going to the TA in New Zealand in 2 months. So that's like
Okay.
my next big goal after I'd finished my Triple Crown. I was like, I want to be an international hiker. So it definitely will definitely lead my life for the next X amount of years. I don't have any plans of like really settling down just yet.
Very cool. Yeah. So getting into the specifics of this experience on the Appalachian Trail, I know that you had a really formative time with Tara on the Mountains to Sea, and that has to count for a lot. But how big was the learning curve here? And was there ever a point where you felt like the team was like a well-oiled machine, just moving down the trail gracefully, nailing aid stations, nailing crew spots, etc.?
We got there. We eventually got there. The first week and a half, it was hell. It was so hard. I mean, everyone was just adjusting. You know, we weren't adjusted yet to the sleep deprivation, and we weren't adjusted to like racing down these long dirt roads, hoping we were going to get there before Tara. And it was just myself and her mom, who are the only two crew members who were there from before the beginning until the very end. And then we had a few others rotating in and out as well in the beginning, but it was kind of a small crew. And so there was a huge curve, and it seemed so surreal that that's what we were doing. I always knew we were going to make it, but there was a lot of moments in the beginning that was like, how are we going to make it? I know we're going to do it, but like, how is this going to happen? And so that really made that first week and a half really dark, really rough. Tara's body and mind was adjusting to everything. So she became this shell of a human that just kept moving forward. That was like all she could focus on. And it was really hard for everybody. But I mean, we just decided if she's going to keep going, then we're going to keep going and just try and make it work. And eventually we all just kind of fell into our roles and figured it out. And then we became a very well-oiled machine. I mean, crew stops towards the middle and the end, 2 minutes maybe of her coming in, everything else getting set. She's already on her way out, you know. Pacers for the next sections would have to be like, oh crap, and like run their asses off to catch up to her because they're still like getting everything ready. But she's in and out like that. So
Just to paint a picture for the audience, what were some of those early moments in the attempt that were making you ask the question how, or making you doubt and wonder how the pieces were ultimately going to come together?
So because Tara and I are best friends, it's easy for her to kind of like let her emotional side show, and kind of let everything go. And so I saw the brunt of like the pain that she was in, and she was able to just open up completely with me. So when I would go out with her, it was a lot of tears. I just saw her in tears the whole time. And she was still moving, which is why I'm like, okay, so we're still doing this, but like, damn, this is taking a huge toll on her. And so I had to figure out how to disconnect my emotional side from it all, from that aspect of being her best friend and not wanting her to be in pain, to remembering that like, but her goal and our goal as a crew is to like do this thing. And so we're gonna have to like ignore a lot of that and just push through. So once I was able to flip that switch, I think that's when it became a lot easier to be like, well, I know it sucks and I'm sorry, but you gotta do X amount of miles today, regardless. So that was kind of a huge curve that we had to adjust to.
And then just from, I'm sure this is subjective, but just based on your observations, how early in the attempt does someone like Tara become a shell of themselves? And it's really just like at that point, suspending their own personal judgment and totally trusting you to make all the decisions about mileage and whatnot. And I guess just like outsourcing their brain.
Yeah, it was pretty early on. I mean, we hit really bad weather in the White Mountains, which is New Hampshire, only the second state of the trail, because we were going south. And because of that bad weather, it's not conducive to high mileage or fast mileage at all. Like the terrain in the Whites is intense, especially when it's rocky and wet and slippery and you're exposed for most of the day. And so we kind of just had to let the trail dictate what was going on. And because of that, we did get behind on mileage. And I think that really took a toll mentally on Tara. And so she kind of did just have to release it and let herself be led by the crew and by us, and just kind of do her best to let us tell her what to do, and then just do her damnedest to try and do it every single day. Because we got pretty far behind in the whites, honestly. Like, it wasn't looking good when we finished New Hampshire. It was like, okay, we're gonna make it, but how the hell are we gonna make it, you know?
Yeah, it was somewhere between 100 and 150 miles at one point early on, maybe 10, 11 days in. And I mean, I'm sure there are people out there that love to get the sense of the sports psychology in that moment. Like, is there anything that you are saying to Tara to reassure her? Are you saying it's all part of the plan, just lock into what I'm saying on this given day? What was working there to keep her faith in the process?
It was a lot of not talking about the future. It was a lot of just focusing on the present moments, the present mile, and like what was going on during that day. Because especially in Maine and New Hampshire, she had a hell of a time ever even considering that the future would happen in general. Like, I remember saying a few things that I now realize I probably shouldn't have said, and she would get mad. She's like, Rascal, how can you, I can't even think past Hanover. Like, all I can think of is Hanover, which is the last town in New Hampshire before you cross into Vermont. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like, she does not see a future beyond X amount of miles. And so it was kind of going along with our crew name of Chump Change, is just focusing on the change every single day of the whole in order to just like keep going.
Yeah, and what does the chump part mean? So the Chump Change, I love the name.
That was born during the Mountains to Sea Trail. When I arrived to crew her on that one, she was already about 10 days in, and I ran into the trail, and she sees me for the first time, and she just loses it. She like melts into the ground. She starts crying. She's like, I'm so sorry you came all the way out here. Like, this is so hard. I don't know if I can do it. XYZ. And I was like, okay, well, let's just like get to the road. You know, it's like 2 miles away. Let's just chip away and get to the road. And then we got to the road, and she's like, okay, I can do the next section. And we just kept adding on a section and a section until it was just Chump Change, you know, the change of the whole. You look at the small, not the whole, because the whole is very intimidating. But every single day it's not that intimidating. And even just one section of the day is not that intimidating.
We had a lot of questions come in around the mental aspect of this hike. And I think what you just described there, really constraining your view of the future, focusing on the present, not really even entertaining the end goal, celebrating things like making it to Hanover or making it to the Delaware Water Gap, you know, et cetera, et cetera. That is an amazing strategy for this multi-week stuff. Were there any other, like off the top of your head, were there any other mental strategies or dialogues, et cetera, that you were having with Tara through this that seemed to also work and keep her faith in the process, stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was like involving the crew and involving the community. Were able to line up pacers for most of the trail, and a lot of them were our friends and her friends or family or whomever. And so some days I would like really look forward to being like, well, guess who's coming today? Like, just hold on. Like, we'll get to the road and you'll probably see this person's going to be here. Or in next week, you know, Liz is coming out, and like, we got to really just keep going so we can see her, and like all these different tiny little checkpoints in a way. Or, oh my gosh, we're going to finish this state today or tomorrow. Up to you. Let's try and finish it today. You know, just tiny little mental games to keep her going. Or, oh, I heard Mom went to the store. I think she got ice cream. Let's get to the van and get some ice cream, you know?
When you think about Tara's mental traits, mental strengths, her spirit, what made her such a good candidate as the race car to get this thing done? And maybe those are things that you also discovered through the process, but at the outset and then through the process, what do you think are like her strengths in this area?
Well, Tara's just the strongest person I know. And it's insane to like watch her mind change throughout this whole thing of like lower self-confidence and not really knowing what's going on, but still pushing forward and never stopping. She was never going to quit. Like, that was definitely never on the table, which is insane because there were some moments where we were in a hole. We were in a black hole and she was just never going to quit no matter what. Obviously she wanted to like get more sleep or maybe like not do as many miles every day. But it was just really beautiful to see that and see that change in her. And she's just a wonderful human, you know. She's pretty humble. It's actually funny. When I like went to visit her one time in Virginia Beach and I was hanging out with her and her coworkers, they didn't even know that she was like a runner or let alone who she is. This was a couple years ago, but I was like, wait, you didn't tell them? And she's like, no, I don't. She's like, it just didn't come up. And I'm like, what do you mean it didn't come up? Like, you're insane. And so I always feel the need to like brag about her because she's not very like vocal about it. Hopefully now she really will be. And it's not like anyone can ignore this. She's also just good. She's a good human. She picks up trash along the way. She makes us pick up trash along the way. So I think just having that like down to earth, humble human being the person who's doing this also brought in a lot of good fortune. A lot of trail magic is what I call it. We got incredibly lucky with the weather window that we had. And I think that's due to the fact that we were out there for the right reasons. You know, we were out there being good people, being good stewards, and just like coming together as a community to try and see what we could do, you know?
Yeah, from the outside looking in, and I didn't even know how tenured you were on these long trails, which is so impressive having that Triple Crown designation, but you could feel the energy even through like a computer screen. It felt like the makeup of your crew and Tara was very righteous. Like there's like a deep, abiding love of the trail, respect. You're there for the right reasons. It wasn't like you were trying to lay siege to this trail and like do it in a very like soulless, mechanical way. It was, I mean, there was logistics to it, right? But like you could feel the love, you know, like the appreciation, which I think counts for a lot in these things, like the right reasons being out there.
And it's cool because she did, like a lot of people are going to say and have already said like, oh, how could she enjoy that? Like she didn't stop and smell the roses. But she already did that back in 2019. She did a thru hike at an average pace. You know, and she's done a lot of hikes at an average pace, but she's an ultra runner. You know, this was the next step. This was the next goal. And even throughout this record, she was saying like, oh, Rascal, look at that small little red newt. Isn't that cute? Or like, oh, look at these trees today. They're really looking beautiful in this light. So she did appreciate it. Like there were a lot of moments of like slowing down to appreciate it, even though we were always moving, you know?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in, and this is mostly a trail running audience, so they might not be aware, but like the phrase hike your own hike. I've always been a big proponent of that because to me, it means regardless of style, you are appreciated and, you know, the onus kind of falls on you to dictate the meaning. And it always shocks me how often that falls by the wayside and people want to get very preachy about what they think is like the proper experience out there. They all count. I would argue Tara's counts for a lot because she was spending 19, 21 hours a day sometimes out on trail for 40 days. Like that's about as connected as it gets.
That was another thing that separated us and we were able to like gain so much momentum is we never left the trail for more than like a half mile, you know, like if we had to camp at a trailhead that wasn't directly on the trail, we never had to drive more than a mile. And there was only one night in the entire record that we were forced to by a ranger to go get a hotel. And that was, 15 minutes from the trail. That was the furthest that she ever got from the trail in that entire 40 days. Other than that, we were either camped right on the trail or we were sleeping in the van at the trailheads, like no more than a half mile away.
Has there been any other flack that has come to your attention that you've been getting in the last week from this? Because I can only imagine when you do something as monumental as this, especially when you get the overall record. I feel like the Appalachian Trail is one of the few things in the trail and ultra running community that the general population can wrap their mind around and appreciate. So yeah, curious there, like any other things that you've had to contend with in the last week as this news has broke?
Yeah, we've actually got a crew group text going and we'll just send screenshots of like silly people who are saying silly things. And I think I'm the only one, but I'm like, I want to get back on there and troll them back. But my favorite is like, oh, well, she didn't carry her stuff most of the time. So like, it's really not that impressive.
Yeah.
And so I'd be like, yeah, you're right. 2 marathons a day for 40 days straight through the weather and that terrain. Not that impressive, no matter what. Like,
Yeah.
are you kidding me? Like, let me see you do one day of that, you know? And so that's been a lot of it. And then, like I said, people saying that she doesn't know how to, like, slow down and stop and smell the roses. Well, that's not what a record attempt is about. So, no. Um, and I've only seen one person who's like, oh, she was getting in the van and they were driving her around
Oh
the
my
trail. And it's like, well, she also had a tracker on the entire time that pinged her location every 10 minutes. So, if
Yeah.
sure, whatever.
I mean, oftentimes that just means that what you did is worth like sometimes the intensity of pushback is a reflection of just how special what you did was. So
Yeah,
um, worthy of being criticized, which is kind of a cool thing.
absolutely. It's
Um,
comical, so it's fine.
yeah. On the strategy side of things, so I find oftentimes when I do these interviews, I find myself overemphasizing the spiritual, emotional, social aspects, which I think are awesome, but the audience is going to like destroy me if I don't get into some of the tactical, logistical, like how did you do it type stuff. So on the
Totally.
strategy side of things, maybe talk about what any given crew stop looked like, and from like setting up the station for Tara to come in to exiting and then getting to the next spot. Like, how are you thinking about efficiency in that regard?
So the first 10 days of the trail, Tara had very meticulously planned out every single crew stop. She had planned out the daily mileage she wanted to hit, XYZ. So that was already in place, which thank God she did that because mom and I needed that buffer to like adjust to everything else. But after we hit Hanover on, it was up to mom and I to make the schedule every day, plan out all the crew stops, decide how many miles she was doing each section, and then if we had a pacer, like decide who was going to pace what. Um, so once we had figured that out, and usually we would figure that out the evening before, even though sometimes it still changed based on where she ended up stopping. Because sometimes we would stop 1 mile short, or sometimes we would push 2 more miles further. Like it really just depended on the end of the day. Um, we wanted to give ourselves enough time to get from stop to stop, which worked out pretty well. We never missed a stop, which was really cool.
Wow.
But once we got there, it was, we set up the chair, we set up the table, we get out the water, we get out the medical kit, which we lovingly call the oh shit kit, that has everything in it. You could, like, any kind of, like, we've got the salt pills, we got the ibuprofen, we got the caffeine pills, we got the leukotape, we got the triple antibiotic ointment, like all the stuff in there. And then we get out a meal for her. So we make something for her to eat while she's there. Just usually some kind of like pasta dish or something that's like really filling that we can just kind of spoon into her mouth while she's sitting there for a moment. And then we have a handheld, which is usually like a little wrap or something that she can take with her to eat, as well as all the snacks that we've counted out. Mom was the calorie counter, and so she would count out all the calories for each section and hand them off to the pacer or make sure they're in Tara's vest, ready to go. And then every crew stop was a little different of like, okay, does she need to change her socks? Does she need to charge the Garmin? Does she need, the leukotape this time, or can we leave it here? And so it was kind of just like figuring it out on the fly. And for the first half of trail, she would sit down at every crew stop and we would, do all these things. And it would never take more than like 5-7 minutes. But towards the middle of the end, she started not wanting to sit at all. And so crew stops became like 2 minutes. And then she would change her socks once a day. And that was the only time of day she would get to sit down for maybe 5 minutes and like hang out with us while she was at the crew stop. And then the minute she left, it was all right, pack it all back up in the van and where are we heading next? And how much time do we have? And should we take a nap? No, we don't have time for that. Let's take a nap once we get there, just to make sure we get there in time. And all the other crazy logistics that just kind of came up during the day, because every single day there was something new or something crazy going on.
I'm sure there are some exceptions. Like I know that Smokies section, there are some long carries up in Maine. It's challenging to meet frequently, but when you get out of those like national forest areas or just more remote sections of the trail, is there a typical cadence? Like, are you able to meet her 5 or 6 times a day, and there's really not much she has to carry on her person, and she can be pretty ultra light, or was it always varying?
The average amount of stops during the day was around 6. Sometimes, 5, sometimes 7, but I would say right around 6. And the goal was to have her not carry anything as often as possible, just to alleviate any pressure on her body, because, her knees hurt, her ankles hurt, her hips hurt, everything hurt. There was never a point where we thought she was going to be injured, but obviously she was very sore every single day. And so any weight we could take off her was like, let's do it. She usually wore like a little waist belt to at least have her phone and her headphones in. But other than that, someone else, like I carried her vest every single time I went out with her. And then other folks would carry their vest with their gear and her gear. And then we wanted to make sure she had her poles as often as possible, for the uphills and whatnot. So yeah, it kind of just varied. She did a little bit by herself. I would say in the beginning she did a lot more by herself than towards the middle and end, because once we had more people join, not only was I able to get out there more with her, but so was everybody else. And JP Giblin, once he joined us in the middle of New York, he's also an ultra athlete. They're teammates, and so I never felt bad about being like, all right, JP, you got 28 miles with her today. I'll see you later. We got other stuff to do, but you're in charge of all the pacing today.
There were many moments, just having seen some of the photos from Pete, some of the videos that were coming out, just demonstrating how much of a team effort this was. Like seeing, for example, I think you or her mom spoon feeding her at those aid stations, like not even letting her waste energy, eating her own calories, but like spoon feeding her, carrying, like another story that I had heard was like, if it wasn't convenient or on track to stop at a certain road crossing, she would continue hiking 3 or 4 miles into the night. And then maybe it's you or JP or another Kenny Powers. One of you is bringing in her entire, on trail hotel setup, right? And just making camp there. Like that stuff just is so illustrative to me of how team oriented this is.
Well, she made it very clear. I think she called me back in February and she was like, she's like, this cannot be my FKT. She's like, I'm already feeling way too much pressure. I do not want this to be my FKT. This needs to be a group FKT, our FKT. This is chump change. Like, I am just the race car. I am just a part of this team. And I was like, okay, cool. Sounds great. And that's exactly what it was. It was a supported FKT. And so we gave her every ounce of support that we could, because that is the category that we were in. And so, yeah, like Mom and I spoon fed her almost every single meal. Whenever a pacer was out there, I would always instruct them, like, she doesn't open her snacks by herself. I'm like, you open the wrapper and then you pass it back to her. Like, she doesn't have time to do that, nor does she have the dexterity to do that right now. And so we were literally doing every single thing to help her, to support her, because moving for that long, for that fast, over that amount of days is seemingly impossible. But because she had us, it was a little bit easier. And then the camping, in the beginning, when it was just me packing out her gear and my gear on the trail, setting it all up before she got there. And then she'd get to camp and I'd have either she would feed herself and I would do her foot care, or vice versa, depending on what was going on. And then we just put ourselves to bed. And then in the morning, I wake her up, I'm feeding her, she's putting her leukotape on her socks, I make sure her vest is good to go, and then I kick her out of camp, and she gets going for the day. I pack everything back up, and I hike out wherever I can to get back to the van to then quickly drive around. And then once JP joined us, I said, oh, thank God, I have somebody else who has the physical ability to do that with me. And so he helped me on all the overnights once he got there, to pack out all the gear. And it was just so much easier to have 2 people out there doing the feeding, doing the foot care, and just getting her as much sleep as possible.
It reminds me, just hearing you recite like everything that was involved in this process. Obviously, the audience has seen and can appreciate the physical, mental, emotional toll on Tara. But there's a part of me that thinks that this could have been just as much, if not more, taxing on you and the crew. To the extent that you're willing to share, like how taxing was this for you? Like, are you needing to recover right now in the same way that Tara is recovering? Were there points where you felt like DNFing because there was just so much involved? Like, talk about that.
Physically, no. I mean, it is a lot of effort for sure physically, but I know I shouldn't compare, but compared to what she was doing, none of us ever felt like, oh my gosh, we can't do this either. Because we're like, well, look at this girl next to us, like pushing it really hard. Honestly, for me, it was the mental aspect in the beginning that made me question whether or not I wanted to be there. But after we got over that hump, then it was never a question in my mind. It was always just like, yeah, of course I'm going to push myself. Like, I also enjoy the push and I enjoy the miles as well, even the hard ones. I've been through a lot during my mileage over the past 6 years. And so, like, this didn't seem like a lot. And plus, like, I get to the van every single day. You know, I get to hang out and see everyone and refuel. And we did eventually figure out how to kind of get naps in during the day and get a little bit more recovery in. And once our bodies adapted to it, it just made sense. Yeah.
Yeah, because I saw this stat. I think maybe Warren Doyle posted it, but it was like, in retrospect, looking at Tara's movement patterns versus Carell's movement patterns. I think Carell might have been moving slightly faster per hour. It was like 3.5 miles an hour. Tara was 3. But Tara ultimately won because she just spent more time out on trail each day. She was willing to just go deeper into the night, starting earlier in the morning. And so I think, like, part of the reason I was asking that question is because it's like she's probably going to bed at like 10 or 11 p.m. and maybe waking up at 2 or 2:30. And like, you have to be the one to be awake to wake her up.
Yeah, it was definitely more of a feat of endurance for sure. For Tara versus Carell. Because she couldn't move as fast as he could during the day, like pace wise. And we aimed to get 5 to 6 hours of sleep at night, and I think Carol was getting around 7 every night. And so just that aspect, thinking of it is like, how the hell did that happen? Between, like, I would say 8:30 and 10 was our normal bedtime, depending on the terrain of the day and how quickly we could get things done. It was 8:30 in the beginning, and then middle it was 9, and then towards the end it was like more closer to 10. And we got up every single day at 3 a.m., started hiking at 3:30 a.m., except for 2 specific mornings we decided to sleep in until 3:30 and not hike until 4. So, but that was because the previous night we had got in at like 11 maybe. So
I find myself going right back to like the social emotional questions. Like you mentioned earlier that 10 days in, at that point, you can already see that Tara is relatively spent, relatively like at her max for being just like taxed across the board. Does it always get progressively worse? Like it becomes more of a job to manage her in a certain way? Or did you find that she just like hit a certain level early on and then she kind of just baselined that level of suffering until the end?
yeah, I would say she hit a level and then baseline for a while, and then she got stronger.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. I remember, I wish I remember exactly where it was, but the sleep deprivation really screwed up my memories. I remember she used to like fight me on the mileage at the end of the day. She'd be like, Rascal, what if we do like one less mile? What if I get like 20 more minutes of sleep? And she would like scroll through the map and be like, what about here or here? And I'm like, all right, fine. Like, she's bawling her eyes out. Obviously she's in pain. I should give her like a small break, you know? But then towards the end, it was like, okay, that really sucks. I'm gonna get there really late and I'm gonna lose sleep, but like, okay, I guess I'll do it. Like, it's fine. And she stopped like fighting me on it. And I was like, oh shit, we got this now. Like, now she is zoned in, she is ready. And I mean, it's crazy the things I made her do. There was a few nights I pushed her over 60 miles and we got in super, super late and she didn't complain about it. And I was like, okay, all right, I guess I'm going to keep doing this.
As the crew chief, and I'm sure you were conferencing with the people around you too, but how confident on a daily basis do you feel in the decisions that you are making Tara execute? Like, how much of it is faith and like I think this is going to work versus I believe I'm working in Tara's best interests overriding on this particular day?
In the beginning, I had no confidence. I was just like, this is what we're doing. Like, I really hope it works. I would get really worked up about it emotionally, and thank God Tara's mom was there because she was always the one to kind of calm me down and be like, Rascal, it's fine. Like, you know, this sucks and it's gonna work out because it just always works out. And I felt like sometimes I was having a harder time planning things for Tara than Tara had executing them, because I was like, oh God, I don't want to make her do this. I really don't want to make her do this. And I would be like pacing back and forth at the end of the day, and mom's like, sit down, Rascal, it's fine. Just like, luckily towards the middle, then once I decided to kind of take emotion out of it, it was like, yeah, okay, this still is going to suck, but you're right. It's going to be fine. And I'm going to stick to my guns now, because going back and forth on decisions really messes with Tara mentally. Obviously, it would anybody. And so I decided to like cut out that anxiety for her and just be like, I made a decision, so let's execute it.
You've given a lot, but are there any other stories that come to mind at any point in the journey that felt like inflection points where if she makes one decision, the record is still intact? If she doesn't make the correct decision, it's seriously in jeopardy, or we've lost it? Like any like really heightened anxiety, inflection pointy, not sure where this is going to go type stories, like whether it was in Virginia or even like a day out from the record where you're like, oh man, like we need to do exactly this right now, or something is in jeopardy? Or was it just smooth sailing because you're so good at what you do?
Not smooth. Every day was a fight. I mean, towards the middle, mom was doing the math every day of like what we had to average and like how far we were behind Carol. Was always the question. It's like, how far behind Carol are we? Because we got ahead of the women's record. We got ahead of the southbound record, in the middle of the trail. And so we weren't super concerned about that. We liked to see those numbers, but it was always like, okay, but what about Carol's numbers? And so once we figured out an average of what we had to kind of decide to do for the rest of the trail, it was me being like, okay, what if we add a mile to that? What if we add 2 miles to that every single day? That way at the end, our final push isn't going to be as massive or as painful as we're all expecting it to be. And our final push was massive and it was painful, but we got in 13 hours and change earlier than the record, so it worked.
There's so many like nitty gritty type things we could discuss. I'm sure you'll be on other podcasts in the future to maybe show some of those. I know we're slightly coming up on time. I think one of the like big picture questions I have for you is, if you look at like the makeup of the crew, the resources you had, the vehicles you had, do you feel like your logistical situation was adequate? Like, is there anything that you would have changed or modified or wish you had additionally to make this easier, more efficient? Or, I mean, conversely, like, do you think less would have been more? Like, so I'm curious to know, like, do you feel like you had everything you needed to do your job well?
In the beginning, I was like really wishing for more bodies, more humans, more support on that aspect of it. We had the vehicle that we use is the van that Tara built out herself back in 2020. The van's name is Burley. And Burley and I are very close now. Love whipping that thing around. Yeah, and that was like vital to the whole record was Burley the van, and then Mom was driving the Durango. So those 2 cars were with us the entire time. And then we had an influx of folks coming in and out. I would say on a normal basis, we had between 4 and 8 vehicles with us. And so sometimes our convoy was like massive. You know, it's like 3:30 a.m., all these lights flick on, and then like, boom, all these cars are just like speeding down this long dirt road to catch up with our girl and whatnot. But we did have a lot of folks who were invaluable. Like Iceman, he is, oh my gosh, this older Pennsylvania man who is he's done the trail before, and he helps out with a lot of FKTs. He's been on Christian Morgan's, he's been with Carol, like, he's been out there, and so he knows these roads like the back of his hand. And so I would always need to, like, confer with him and be like, hey, I've actually only hiked this trail. I've never driven this trail. Like, this is insane. Because some of the roads he took me down, I was like, I should not be driving this van down this road. And so that was huge. There were some times I felt like there were too many cooks in the kitchen, especially on the weekends when, like, all these random people would show up, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, this is too much. And, like, I know Tara, and I know she gets overwhelmed, and so there were a few times I had to, like, step up and be like, hey, I need everyone to just disappear for a minute. You know, I need everyone. She's going to come in. I don't want there to be, like, laughing and talking and all this extra stuff going on. Just, like, we're going to be calm. She's going to come in. She's going to go out. It's going to be great. Whatever. But, I mean, we were also so lucky, and all the resources that did come in and all the support that did come in. We had a lot of people cooking for us. Amy and Steve were a huge part of our crew. They had their own van, and Amy made the most nutritious, amazing meals for Tara and us, the whole crew. Like, she cooked for everyone. And so that was crazy, because Mom and I were slacking on food in the beginning. So
I don't know a ton about Iceman. Maybe you can fill in some of the details. My observation, I'm guessing he's retired. And if he is retired, I feel like he has one of the coolest post-retirement gigs going where if he wants to, he can, because he has so much expertise, etc., he could join anyone's crew and be this, like, master logistics person and giving you all the tips. Like, what a cool gig to be doing at that point.
He is so cool. And he loves to scout. Like, he loves to drive, and so he loves to scout roads. So if there's, like, a road or a crossing that he hasn't been to, he gets all excited and he'd be like, I'll be back. And then he just disappears. And then he, like, shows up randomly a few hours later. He's like, well, Rascal, let me tell you about this. Like, you could probably get the van back there, but... And I'm like, okay, I don't know. He's so great.
This was something that I know was, well, I guess you could interpret it anyway, but some people would say it was a pro. Some people would say it was a con. You look at, like, Scott Jurek's attempt. I guess it was 9 years ago, which is time flies. But 9 years ago, he had so many people who just wanted to be fans of the effort, and they sort of, like, created a posse in the same way that, like, certain rock bands, you know, people will just spend a summer, like, following them across the country, right? Like, that's a thing. Did Tara have that aspect where there were people that just wanted to, like, be in the scene? And was that a distraction? Was it a benefit? Like, did you embrace the social part of it?
It was definitely more of a positive than it was a negative. There were a few people who came in that I was like, okay, great, you were here for, like, 5 miles, but we're good, thank you, or things like that. But yeah, we did have a posse. I mean, Amy and Steve were one of them. We didn't personally know them before they showed up, and then they stayed with us for 2 weeks. They left for a week, and then they came back for the rest of the whole thing. So, I mean, that was amazing. We had other folks that just know Tara through her YouTube and through the hiking community, or personal close friends that would come out for a while. Matador and his wife Heather, like, that was an amazing, and they were coming out to support the crew too, which was also huge. Because sometimes you don't realize how much support you need to being that support. And so when certain folks showed up to support, you know, just myself and just Mom and just the crew, it was like, oh man, thank you so much. Like, I really needed that. And so it was definitely a positive over a negative. There were a few folks, like I said, that I was like, okay, we're good. Thank you. You can move on. I don't know why you're here.
So if you were to do anything differently in a future year, maybe just based on what I'm hearing, maybe one of them would be filling in some of the gaps up north, like having slightly more pacers support. Yeah. That's a remote section to begin with. Like, I mean,
it is.
Monson is a Haven, Caratunk kind of Rangeley, but like there's long gaps, right? So maybe finding more trail angels up there and crew and pacers.
Yeah, I mean, also that was like the very beginning of the attempt, and so people weren't necessarily paying attention to us just yet. You know,
I was.
I know you were. JP and Tara are always like, I know Finn's watching. But like, yeah, I think because of that, like next time when we do something crazy like this, which I'm assuming we will be doing something again like this, everyone's going to be paying attention from the very beginning,
Right.
which is good and bad. Like towards the end, I got nervous that we were going to have just massive amounts of people, especially at Springer. And so I had someone help me turn her tracker onto password protected. And if you already had the link, that's great. You could still see her, but you couldn't just log on to her website and like see it anymore for the past, I think it was like the last like 48-ish hours. Because I wanted to protect her, especially in that last couple miles. Like that was her time. Her, me, and JP, we got to do those last miles together. And I wouldn't have changed that at all. Next time though, I would love a camera crew because I can't remember a lot of it because I was so sleep deprived. And so I'm like trying to rack my brain right now of like, where was that memory from? Like what? How do I piece all them together? And Emily Cameron is someone who came with us the last like day and a half. She's so amazing. She made the last 12 hours video, and it is just priceless. And I wish we had more of that because also Tara does not remember a lot of this record either. So
she came in just from the goodness of her heart and being just a fan of the sport, friends with Tara, etc. Was this even a consideration at the beginning? Like, had you requested content opportunities and it just wasn't available, or
No, I don't. We never really fully talked about it. Tara is a YouTuber, and so she had like left her camera equipment with us, but I mean I had zero time to pick it up.
Yeah,
I barely had enough time to post all those Instagram stories,
full-time job.
Yeah, and I also don't think she would have wanted it from the beginning because she was feeling a lot of pressure. And I think having a camera crew, anyone more than just Pete, because Pete is a close and personal friend, I think it would have been too overwhelming for her from the start.
I think that's really good context because I think one of the debates that has been raging in the trail community right now from like a content media representation standpoint is like, to what extent should have one of her partners come in and had like a full-time social person or a crew and tell the story. And at least from what you're saying, it sounds like even if it was there, maybe like that actually the costs would have outweighed the benefits just from like a focus standpoint.
I think so. I think it would have been a little distracting for her and maybe definitely like an anxiety of hers of like, oh man, I don't want people to see me like XYZ or whatever. But I mean, at some point she kind of let that go. And I mean, she was able to show it all with us, with the crew, down to the nitty gritty of things. Like we were literally doing everything for her. So there was very little boundaries.
Maybe before we go, just a couple like personal reflections for you on the experience going into it. I mean, just the fact that there's this opportunity to have an amazing, like maybe not once in a lifetime adventure, but like not many times in a lifetime adventure. There's that benefit. But was there anything else that you were looking to get out of it personally, or did like the trail change you in any ways this time around that you weren't anticipating?
The trail always teaches me something. Like anytime I go out there, I definitely benefit from it in some way. And so I knew that going into it. I knew I would get something out of it. And I did. I mean, I got to spend 40 days with some of the most amazing people. I got to see, you get to restore your faith in humanity a little bit when you're out on these ventures. Because when we were passing through areas, like there was a lot of hostels that just opened themselves up for us. Like, oh my gosh, yes, come take a shower, come do laundry, please, whatever you need. There were so many people who came to support. So just like that aspect of it is like so fulfilling, and knowing that like we're accomplishing something that is huge, that is making history, and being a part of like a movement to really just empower young women and anybody in general, but like young women specifically, to like, if you have a crazy dream and you have a crazy goal, like what's the harm in attempting that? Like before I started through hiking, I had zero self-confidence. I was afraid of everything. And there's no way in hell I would have thought that I would have even made it on my first through hike. Like I went into the AT having only backpacked overnight one time before. And I left for the AT solo when I was like, I don't know, 22, 23. I was just a kid. And ever since then, I've blossomed and flourished into this person who I am now. And I really hope that so many people can see that in this journey and what we've done, and they can get out there and do that themselves, regardless of their gender, but women specifically would be nice, So,
I mean, I think to showcase how impressive your reach was, didn't you raise over like 30 grand currently? Like, I mean, this number's going to keep going, like over 30 grand for Girls on the Run.
Our goal was to raise 20 grand for the girls, and right now we're a little bit past 30K for Girls on the Run, and that donation will be matched as well by Ultra. So
I guess in terms of current life status, so you mentioned the Tay Aurora maybe later this year. What does it look like to transition from that intense of a day-to-day existence to, I mean, maybe just for the time being, things are super slowed down. Like, is that something that you were ready to embrace? Do you embrace it? How do you, because like we talk about post-race blues all the time, or thru-hike blues and thru-hiking community. Like, so I feel like it's worth happening.
There's something in the hiking community and the running community, I guess, that post-trail depression is something that's huge, and I've experienced it a lot throughout all my miles. But luckily now that I've done so many adventures of leaving and coming back, I kind of know what to anticipate, and I know how to, like, okay, you just got to keep yourself moving, focus on your next goal and surround yourself with really good people. And obviously you'll make it through, and then you'll make it to your next adventure. And so that's kind of like what I focus on. We've now had almost a full week to kind of just like not do anything, to rest, recover, deal with the social media response and all the things that are going on. I'd like to find a little part-time job in between all my gigs. I just like doing a little bit of part-time work so I can make enough money to survive, and then just have enough time to also like live my life and get back to some running and biking and climbing and just plan for my next venture. So if anyone's got any work opportunities, Rascal's unemployed.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I feel like there's, again, it's only if you want it, but like I feel like there's a massive opportunity to become like this consultant for other, not even Appalachian Trail attempts, but just like multi-day, multi-week things across the board, because you have such specialized, impressive experience. And I mean, I can count on many hands just from this summer alone the number of attempts that I was following on the Colorado Trail or the PCT or the AT or the Hayduke. I mean, the list goes on, right? And I'm sure a lot of these people were not quite as logistically prepared, not to mention the fact that you have thru-hiking experience too. So I'm not trying to prop you up too much, but like, I feel like you have this amazing value that I wonder if, your services will be continually requested often in the years to come.
Totally. Absolutely. But I am chump change is my number one goal. So, whenever we have an adventure coming up, that's the next thing that I'm looking forward to. The crew has already talked. We're all itching for something else coming up. So
I was going to say, I almost, sometimes I get flack when I ask the what's next question, but and I'm sure for Tara, it's way too early, but maybe not. Maybe she's just so stoked on the scene. It's always like, what's next? Could you foresee like a reunion of this crew and this race car on another trail?
I think so. I have no clue how we're going to top this or like what we're going to do next, but I mean, what we created was so special and obviously is very successful. And so having that success underneath our belt is like, damn, we really are limitless. Like whatever we want to do, like, and now that we have folks' attention, we could shoot for the moon even further than what we already got. So
last question for you before we go. And I really appreciate your time. I know things are busy, but one of the questions that was frequently asked on Instagram, and again, maybe this is reflective that there is a massive opportunity to create like a career out of this, but people want to know what advice you have in general, like any just overhead advice for crews that are handling either multi-day races that are like 200 miles in nature or these multi-week expeditions. Do you have any just like immediate off the top of your head pieces of advice for how to be prepared in those situations?
I would say like try not to take it too seriously, which is like maybe not such great advice, but like have fun with it, because we did end up having a lot of fun with it. We put glitter on ourselves and we had glow sticks at night on the last night, and we sang songs out there on trail and we made fun of each other, and things like that. So we made it more conducive to like, okay, this really sucks and this is really hard, but we're going to make the most out of it and we're going to laugh at it. And that was huge in the morale aspect of it all, because you can tell when everyone is just sleep deprived and cranky and ornery and there might be drama going on. Like, that is not good for anything. That is not good for success. That's not good for a crew. And so to have just a little bit of joy amongst all of the bullshit is like very vital. It's very vital.
There's actually one more I got to ask you. I asked you offline, and this is fun. Favorite state, favorite section, favorite trail town?
My favorite state in general is probably Vermont. I lived there for a couple years, and so the Green Mountains are just very near and dear to my heart. And that's when the attempt started to become more realistic, of like the sun came out and I was like, oh man, this is gonna happen. And so Vermont was definitely my favorite state. My favorite section is probably the Roan Highlands in Virginia. It is just beautiful through there. And Tara likes to give me some flack for this, but I definitely did give myself some of the best sections to run with her, like cherry pick what I wanted to do. She's like, I see what you're doing here, Rascal. And I was like, well, yeah, I'm in charge. What do you want from me? And so I got to do some of my favorite sections throughout the trail. And favorite trail town. Gosh, we didn't really get much time to stop, but the crew did have time to stop in Hot Springs really quickly. We actually like went out to lunch. I felt like slightly guilty, but not that guilty. And so that was like a really fun time to just like sit and breathe for a moment before we hauled ass to the end. So Hot Springs is a really good one.
Cool. Well, Rascal, we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for just the amazing contributions that you and the team made to this FKT. I think for things of this stature, there was just a lot of clamoring for this 360 understanding of exactly what it took. And I think you filled in so many of the missing gaps. And I'm looking forward to just seeing any subsequent content that comes out around, what you've done. If you have blog posts or videos, anything, we're all excited. So anyways, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Yeah, happy trails.